So South Africa has charged Israel with genocide in the ICJ, which is the International Criminal Court. Israel is apparently furious about these charges that South Africa has levied against them. There are 84 pages. I'm going to go through quite a bit of this document. I know a lot of people have been reporting on it, but you haven't really gotten many deep dives into the actual charges that South Africa is bringing forward against Israel. Israel is planning on representing themselves in court. They are planning on showing up and defending themselves, but they're going to have a difficult time. These 84 pages in this document that South Africa put out there is very detailed. They go through not only what Israel is currently doing to the Palestinians, but the history of what Israel's been doing to the Palestinians, many of the comments that are being made by leadership in Israel that is highly genocidal, and just the dire situation for the Palestinians in Israel. This document is very damning. I think that anybody should read it. Everybody should read this document. It is 84 pages, but it's 84 pages of shock. As you read it, you'll read it very quickly because it is such a shocking document. It's not a dry read. They've packed this full of information. And in particular, people who should read this are people who don't believe Israel's doing anything wrong, people who believe that Israel has the right to defend themselves, that this is the only way. Those are the people who really need to read this. I'm just not sure that they actually will. But let's go over quite a bit of this document. Of course, I'm not going to read you the 84 pages, but we're going to go over quite a bit of it. All right, so they start off and they say, this application concerns acts threatened, adopted, condoned, taken, and being taken by the government and military of the State of Israel against the Palestinian people, a distinct national, racial, and ethnical group, in the wake of the attacks of Israel on the 7th of October, 2023. South Africa unequivocally condemns all violations of international laws by all parties, including the direct targeting of Israeli civilians and other nationals and hostage-taking by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. No armed attack on a state's territory, no matter how serious, even an attack involving atrocity crimes, can, however, provide any possible justification for or defense to breaches of the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, whether as a matter of law or morality. So they're saying right there to Israel, look, what happened to you was bad, and even though the attack involved atrocities against the Israeli civilian people, it doesn't then give you the right to commit a genocide. So somebody did something really horrible to you, but you don't get to turn around and wipe out an entire nation of people and severely debilitate their ability to be a nation. And that is really, when you look at the actual definition of genocide in those 1948 conventions, it is targeting a group of people based on their ethnicity or their nationality or their religion. You're going after the group for who they are. And when it comes to the Palestinian people, this is a nation, a group of people who aspire to have a nation of their own. And the act of genocide against them would be any group that is debilitating their ability to have a nation, or to continue their nation. They have a nation. They clearly have a nation. Whether or not it's a recognized nation by Israel, whether or not it's a recognized nation by others, does it have a government that we're going to recognize, right? We don't recognize a lot of governments around the world. It doesn't mean that a nation of people doesn't exist there. People exist whether we label them a nation or not. And that is when people get into the debate of, well, there never was a Palestine. Well, okay, you might not think that there was, by modern definitions, a big government with bureaucracy for the nation of Palestine. It was other bureaucracies like the Ottoman Empire or the British Empire, but there was still a nation of people there. Whether you want to put that nation of people under Ottoman rule or British rule, or hell, put them under Chinese rule, whatever rule you want to stick those people under, there's still a nation there. And that nation is in existence. It's real, it's tangible, there's people, whether you like it or not. If you then try to demolish that nation, that is the crime of genocide. And that is what South Africa is claiming that the Israelis are doing. So they go on to say, since October 7th, Israel has engaged in a large-scale military assault by land, air, and sea on the Gaza Strip. a narrow strip of land, approximately of 365 square kilometers, one of the most densely populated places in the world. Gaza, home to approximately 2.3 million people, almost half of them children, has been subjected by Israel to what has been described as one of the heaviest conventional bombing campaigns in the history of modern warfare. By 29th of October alone, it was estimated that 6,000 bombs per week had been dropped on the tiny enclave. In just over 2 months, Israel's military attacks had wreaked more destruction than the razing of Syria's Aleppo between 2012 and 2016, Ukraine's Mariupol, or proportionately the Allied bombing of Germany in World War II. So it's worse than the Allied bombing in Germany in World War II. The destruction wrought by Israel is so extreme that Gaza is now a different color from space. It's a different texture. So the entire area looks completely different from space. Since the 7th of October, October 7th, Israel has engaged in, let me get to my next point here on this big document, 84 pages long. But so since this letter was written, the numbers have risen even more starkly. At least 21,110 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed, and over 55,243 other Palestinians have been wounded, many severely. The death toll includes over 7,729 children, not including the 4,700 women and children still missing and presumed dead under the rubble. Could you imagine dying under rubble? That is the worst way to die. The people who die in the blasts are lucky. Those are the lucky ones. The ones buried under rubble, they die slow. Entire multi-generational families have been wiped out completely. Over 355,000 homes, equivalent to more than 60% of Gaza's housing stock in Gaza, has been damaged or destroyed. 1.9 million Palestinians, approximately 85% of the total population, have been internally displaced. Many fled the north of the territory to the south, having been ordered to do so by Israel, only to be bombed again in the south and told to flee once again further south or southwest, where they're reduced to living in makeshift tents in camps with no water, sanitation, or other facilities. Israel has bombed, shelled, and besieged Gaza's hospitals, with only 13 out of 36 hospitals partially functional and no fully functioning hospital left in northern Gaza. Gaza's healthcare system has all but collapsed, with reports of operations, including amputations and cesarean sections, taking place without anesthetic. A significant portion of the wounded and sick are unable to access any adequate care. Contagious and epidemic diseases are rife amongst the displaced Palestinian population, with experts warning of the risk of meningitis, cholera, and other outbreaks. The entire population in Gaza is at imminent risk of famine, whereas the proportion of households affected by acute food insecurity is the largest ever recorded, according to the Integrated Food Security Phase classification. Experts warn that silent, slow deaths caused by hunger and thirst risk surpassing those violent deaths already caused by Israeli bombs and missiles. Goes on to say, in Gaza, the apparent strategy of Israel is the indefinite warehousing of an unwanted population of 2 million Palestinians, whom it has confined to a narrow strip of land through its comprehensive 15-year-old air, land, and sea blockade. So again, in Gaza, the apparent strategy of Israel is the indefinite warehousing of an unwanted population of 2 million Palestinians. And that's exactly right. They are clearly not wanted there. They want them to leave. They've been outright saying they want them to go. But the way they've treated them over the last several decades has been especially Gaza over the last 15 years, has been nearly 20 years, has been clearly to make their lives miserable and to let them know that they're completely unwanted. They're an unwanted neighbor. And Israel's doing everything they can to make their lives so miserable that they move. But move where? So the World Bank reported in 2021 that Gaza had undergone a multi-decade process of de-development and de-industrialization, resulting in a 45% unemployment rate and a 60% poverty rate, with 80% of the population dependent on some form of international assistance, in significant part because of the hermetic sealing of the access of Gaza to the outside world, the coastal aquifer, the sole source of natural drinking water in Gaza, has become polluted and unfit for human consumption because of containment by seawater and sewage, substantially driving up water costs for an already destitute population. Gaza is heavily dependent on external sources, Israel and Egypt, for power, and Palestinians living with rolling power blackouts of between 12 and 20 hours daily, severely impairing daily living and the economy. The entry and export of goods is strictly controlled by Israel, which has throttled the local economy. The healthcare system in Gaza is flat on its back, with serious shortages of healthcare professionals, inadequate treatment equipment, and low supplies of drugs and medicines. Palestinians in Gaza can rarely travel outside of Gaza, which is a denial of their fundamental right to freedom of movement. Now, it goes on to talk about all of the people who had been killed since September of 2000 in Gaza, but then it goes on to talk about the peaceful attempts that Palestinians have tried to protest, saying that a further 214 Palestinians, so they talk about the thousands of Palestinians who've been killed in the various different asymmetrical wars that Israel has waged on Gaza. But now they're talking about the peaceful protests that the Palestinians have attempted. A further 214 Palestinians, including 46 children, were killed during the Great March of Return, a large-scale peaceful protest along the separation fence between Gaza and Israel, in which thousands of Palestinians participated every Friday for over 18 months, demanding that the blockade imposed on Gaza be lifted and the return of Palestinian refugees to their homes and villages in Israel. On one particularly lethal day alone, Israel killed 60 Palestinian protesters, as determined by the Independent Commission of Inquiry on the Protests in the Occupied Palestinian Territory. During these weekly demonstrations, the Israeli security forces killed and gravely injured civilians who were neither participating directly in hostilities nor posing an imminent threat to life. Among those shot were children, paramedics, journalists, and persons with disabilities. Those killed by Israeli soldiers firing from behind the separation fence included 3 medics and 2 journalists. A total of over 36,100 Palestinians, including 8,800 children, were injured by Israel, including 4,903 people who were shot in the lower limbs, many while standing hundreds of meters away from the snipers unarmed. 156 of them had to have at least one limb amputated, and over 1,200 required specialized limb reconstruction treatment. The commission found that the maiming was not accidental. The rules of engagement adopted by Israel permitted snipers to shoot at the legs of major insiders. One Israeli soldier admitted that he shot 42 knees in one day. The commission found that there were reasonable grounds to believe that Israeli snipers intentionally shot children, knowing them to be children. And they also intentionally shot health workers and journalists, despite seeing that they were clearly marked as such. It further found reasonable grounds to believe that Israeli snipers shot disabled demonstrators intentionally, despite seeing that they had visible disabilities and despite them not presenting an imminent threat. Now, when I went to the West Bank, I was there during this time where the Great March of Return was going on. And I actually met with a couple of doctors. They just happened to be sitting in the hotel lobby of the hotel that I was staying in. And we were talking about, just talking to each other. And I was asking them what they were in the West Bank doing. And they said that they had just come back from Gaza, that they were there operating on these children who had been shot during the Friday night protests, these peaceful protests that these children were, and teenagers and young adults were engaging in. And these doctors described to me, they were from the East Coast, through, I think, sort of like a Doctors Without Borders, or maybe even a Christian organization. And they described that these kids were, when they were there, they witnessed these kids being intentionally shot, their eyes being shot out or their knees being shot out. And they were using particular types of bullets to shoot their eyes out, knowing it wouldn't kill them, but it would just take an eye. They would shoot regular ammunition to shoot out their knees. And these doctors were working on these children in the hospitals. They then wanted to show me photographs of what they were saying. Would you like to see photos? And I said, yeah, I would like to see these pictures. And they opened up their laptops and they started looking for the photographs. And then they realized that the IDF took their laptops when they left Gaza, and they had confiscated their laptops for a couple of hours, and they had deleted all of the photographs. They deleted the evidence. They didn't want anybody to see. They didn't want the world to see what was going on. Another friend of mine, I know these are anecdotal stories, but I just wanted to share them with you. But another friend of mine who was very much a Zionist went over there with an organization. He's an engineer, and went with an organization to set up water facilities in the West Bank. He worked with this organization for several years, working to do the measurements and scout the locations and build the infrastructure. And he said ultimately they gave up on the projects. They were Americans working on these. They gave up on the projects because, one, Israel took forever to give them any sort of permit. A permit that would take a settlement in the West, an illegal settlement in the West Bank, would get the permit within days or a week or two. It would take these organizations months, if not years, to receive those same permits. And when they finally got the permits and they sent the engineers out to do the surveying of the land and take the measurements, they were shot at by the IDF. So they ultimately had to shut down the operation because they were shot at when they were trying to just build water systems. So this is what the people are living with there. It's a completely unjust and unfair situation that has been developed to make their lives miserable. Goes on to say, in Gaza, the apparent strategy of Israel is the indefinite warehousing of an unwanted population. Okay, we already said that here. Sorry, it makes me lose my place every time I go forward on this. Let me just keep, okay, let me just keep, I'll just scroll rather than click on my notes so that we can, it's just a lot of pages. I was just hoping to, here we go. The Oslo Accord. So it goes on to talk about some of the history of the region and the history of the West Bank and the attempts at peace agreements between Israel and Palestine. And they really put out a case to show that Palestine was always given an unfair, unjust deal. It was never a good deal for the Palestinians. So when there's these ideas that they've rejected all of these really great deals, the deals were always really bad. For example, the Oslo Accords divided administrative competences over 3 areas of the West Bank. So the West Bank is divided up into 3 areas, A, B, and C. It's not the whole West Bank is for the Palestinians. That's how it should be, right? Because that's what the Palestinians want. They want that nation. That's what the UN said, this is their land. And the Israelis kept building settlements on that land. They kept moving in anyway, and they just started popping up little villages all the way to cities with tens of thousands of people living in them. Some of the biggest cities in the West Bank, Israeli settlements, are 100,000 people living in them. They're full-on cities. So the Oslo Accords was trying to figure this out, and they decided, okay, we're going to divide up the West Bank. It's already a partition. Already the Palestinians are getting a very small amount of land in what was previously land they could travel throughout all of what is now Israel, all of Gaza, all the West Bank. They were able to travel freely before the Zionist movement started and the partition plan of 1947, 1948. And so then they're now relegated to this little tiny area in the West Bank and in Gaza. And the Oslo Accords further made this smaller by dividing up the West Bank into areas A, B, and C, which is like Swiss cheese throughout the entire area. It's not like A is over here, B is over here, and C is over here. It's just like a Swiss cheese map. So the Oslo Accords divided administrative competences over 3 areas of the West Bank, A, B, and C, not including East Jerusalem, between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. The occupying power, Israel, the occupying power, is what South Africa is saying in this. Area A comprised 18% of the West Bank, is stated to be under the full administrative control of the Palestinian Authority. So listen to that. They received 18% of the West Bank. The West Bank, which is supposed to be theirs, they have full control over only 18% of the West Bank. Area B is 22% of the West Bank, and that is under joint control of the Palestinian Authority and Israel. They are patrolling, both of them patrol those regions. And Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank, the vast majority of the West Bank, is under full Israeli administrative and security control. So they've essentially annexed this land, and they've given a little bit of reservations to the Palestinians. A whole 18% of the West Bank is under Palestinian control. And yet they're blamed for the conditions of the West Bank when they're not even in control of the West Bank. And they end up giving people in the West Bank, the Israeli settlements, a lot of resources and water and electricity, and they give hardly anything to the Palestinian people. It says the institutionalized regime of discriminatory laws, policies, and practices applied by Israel subjects Palestinians to what constitutes an apartheid regime. So in the West Bank in particular. And when people talk about apartheid, a lot of times you get the response from people who are really, supportive of Israel will say, not true. There's 2 million Arabs living inside of Israel. It's clearly not apartheid. It's totally fine. Palestinians have the West Bank. Israel has Israel. And inside of Israel, there's 2 million Palestinian Israelis. But when you look at the West Bank, which only has 18% of the control under the Palestinians and the rest of it, 22% under Israel and Palestinian combined, and 60% under Israel control, the West Bank is obviously practicing an apartheid. They have separate roads for the Palestinians and separate roads inside the West Bank for Israelis only to drive on.